Shaun from London, England. I fought for Ukraine, yet I picked a side and we lost. I can accept this. Flew into Kiev.
Hi, I'm Shaun, former British serviceman, Ukrainian Marine, mercenary, terrorist, Nazi. That's what Russell wants you to believe. Welcome to another episode of Pinner's Patter. Today we're going to look at, and I know people have been waiting for this, but today we're going to look at Russia today. We're going to peel back the layers of Russian state-run media and delve into their stories behind the stories. We'll explore how Russian disinformation propaganda is crafted from my own personal experiences, how narratives are shaped, and how propaganda influences public opinion, like in my sham trial, long before I ever got to a court. And also when they use it in global events and geopolitics. I mean, it's out there for everybody to see. Mostly, I'm not going to insult your intelligence. We're just going to break down my situation and my captivity and how they formulated a narrative while I was being held in prison long before I ever got to the court, and how these state-run media outlets are, they're part of the torture system. We're going to analyze those Russian media clips, expose their techniques, and uncover the truth behind the narratives pushed by state-run outlets and other powerful voices in Russia, and how RT ultimately are complicit not just in my torture, but the torture of many others. In this episode, we're going to talk all things propaganda.
Number 3, Johnny Ivan, pull the pina da.
It's Ukraine's territory. Ukraine should be trying to win it back as far as I'm concerned.
Well, you've seen a bit about RT and what it says it wants to do. Let's talk about my background before we get into the crux of this. My background was 9 years in the British military, serving with the Royal Anglian Regiment. I went on tours in Bosnia and Northern Ireland, worked with 3 years in counter-terrorism operations, working with covert operations platoon out in Northern Ireland. And then I went on an exchange on the second deployment to Bosnia in the early 90s that took me to America and Washington State to do my SEER training, survival, evade, resist, and escape, which is everything I joined the military for. It's bread and butter stuff. It's really the stuff that's going to keep you alive in the situation I found myself in 2022, some nearly 30 years later after I did the course. So for me, it's you're going through a survival element to the course, which is you're learning how to live off the land, how to catch food, through to evading the enemy, resistance training and conduct after capture, and how you've got to portray yourself to give you the best chances of really staying alive through a situation like that. So, and then the escape phase, which is then culminated into a 5-day exercise where you're putting all that to use, and you're eventually captured, where you have to go through that resistance part of the training. You're putting all that theory into use in a practical exam, I would, test exercise. So for me, when I did find myself captured or in the position of starting an escape and evasion, which I'd trained for some years earlier, literally I'd had planned that I didn't want to be captured by the Donetsk People's Republic. I wanted to be captured by the Russians, by an officer, give myself a best chance of survival. And everybody knows that when you've been through SEER, the initial capture is the most dangerous phase. At that point, when I was captured, I was initially handed over to the Russians, who did all the torture, the stabbing in the leg. They knew I might be someone of interest, as they didn't want me running off anywhere. So I was stabbed in the leg. I was electrocuted on the fingers. I was asked bizarre questions, which, you can read about in my book, or you can read articles online. So I won't go too much into that detail, but I really want to talk about at the point where RT became, you know, in a part of my interrogation. So I went to a black site in Donetsk. It was only after several days of brutal interrogation, electrocuted on the ears, not given any food, beaten, threatened with an ISIS-style video murder that they would send to my family by the Russian FSB, held in an MGB, which is like the Donetsk people's version of the FSB, but in Donetsk. Held at one of their sites, but there was obviously the guys was running it was Russian. So again, it was only after several days in an isolation cell, beaten, and after receiving brutal torture like electrocution in the ears, stabbed in the leg, and starved, no food or anything like that, disorientated, that I was hooded and taken to another location where that was my first introduction into what was really a propaganda phase. They wanted to tell the world that I was captured and that it got hold of a Brit. And they weren't really interested in what I had to say. They were formulating their own narratives. And what you'll hear on the video is me using my training in SEER to be as boring and as bland as possible. I mean, it's almost hard. You have to stay focused on not drawing attention or anything, saying something that could draw in another response and more beatings and more torture. So you really do have to be on your ball with that. But my first introduction to the propaganda wasn't essentially RT. It was with a propagandist called Rudenko, who seemed to be, when they made the decision, I was captured on April the 13th. And then somewhere around April the 17th, 19th, it was decided that I would go through the official channels and they would announce that I was captured. So I went to a prosecutor's office, and there I met a propagandist, Russian propagandist called Rudenko, who initially told me I was a Nazi, and that was my first real sort of insight into Russian propaganda. He seemed to have access to the prosecutor, my charges that had already been established, my legal team that I was told that I would have, that I didn't see all the way through until the trial, really. So yeah, I mean, it was bizarre. He was allowed to ask questions. Even the guy there was nervous of the propagandist. So it was quite unusual that he had access to the judicial system at that early stage, right from day one. But I was always prepped that whatever I said, would be twisted and edited. So I was pretty conscious that all I wanted to do at that particular time was get on the TV.
The situation was that we were moving from one position to another. We don't exactly know where we were going. It was early hours of last Tuesday morning, about 4 o'clock in the morning. In the dark, we moved to another position. We collected casualties and other soldiers on the route down. When we got to the I assume, which was the position we were going to, mortars and aircraft started shooting rockets at houses and around the area we were in.
It's really important to keep your composure when you're in a situation like that. It might sound odd because, you've been beaten, stabbed, starved, you don't know where you are, you're being pulled out for interrogations, but this is all systemic, it's structured. And after the event, I think a good example would be the Crocus massacre, Crocus shopping mall massacre in Russia, where openly I went through the same process, or those guys went through the same process as me. Suspects were captured. One had his ear cut off. One was brutally electrocuted on his genitalia. That was all put onto social media. Russians love to record all their torture they do to you. And that's sent out on social media, and then you go into the propaganda phase. So initially you go for the initialization phase, which is like the stage one, the worst kind of treatment you can get. And then afterwards, it's really about, well, if you don't do what you're told, we could go back to that. And for several days before I got on the books in Russian captivity, I was captured April 13th, but when I got my indictment, we were officially on the Russian books somewhere around the 19th of April. So for those days, they were deciding what to do with us. So during those days, you're pulled out for interrogations, you're electrocuted, you're beaten. And that's really your real first experience of how they use the propaganda. And RT always takes the lead, Russia Today. And during those stages, it's really hard not to get angry with the guys asking you the questions. Like one of the questions I had was, did you bring your guns over from the UK? And one of the interrogations I had, I was pulled out for 45 minutes and asked about, the local media and newspapers and how they run and which parties were affiliated to what newspaper. And that was one 45-minute interrogation. So it's really hard not to sometimes get aggressive, get mad. And if you meet aggression with aggression, you really don't want to do that. So sometimes you have to keep calm. And what we're going to more later, but in this interview, it's Roman Kazarev, an RT presenter. And the Russians are quick to use Western accented failed journalists to project narratives to a Western audience. So, already in this interview, I was being called a Nazi, a mercenary, didn't understand what I was fighting for. At no point, again, I'll touch on it again, I had no representation. I didn't sign a waiver. My hood was removed and there was Roman Kazarev. And even if you've got a video recording saying, do you agree to this interview? You're not going to say no, because behind the camera are actually the two goons you see in the videos. But the guys doing the beatings and the electrocutions, or report you when you go back that you're a problem. And these guys control your life. You're in an isolation cell. They're controlling your food, your sleep. You're already disorientated. The light stays on 24 hours a day. You're in an isolation cell, 1 meter by 3. There's a CCTV camera in there watching you 24/7. You're not allowed to do any physical exercises. All you can do is sit and stand. You're not allowed to sleep through the day from 6 to 10. You can't really do anything. I mean, one time I must have stood against the wall for 12 hours, absolutely physically exhausted by the end of it. And on top of that, you're getting the beatings, you're getting no food, a bit of bread every now and again. So by the time the trial came, I was about 60 kilos. But there's no representation. There's no police complaints commission. There's no lawyers there. You're getting thrust into a trial by public opinion, and you can't get emotionally caught in that. And as I said before, my sole aim during that initial time was to get on TV. So you've got to have a plan. You've got to start kicking in. And unfortunately, one of the things I realized was I was the only person probably that had had any resistance training. So I was pretty well adapted to the stages of capture, what was coming next, how they would use it, how I needed to conduct myself, show my injuries on the TV, show my conditions. And they were pretty quick, once, 2 or 3 times, once I'd done some interviews, that they wanted to shave me, wash me, clean me, make me look a bit more presentable, because I just looked like crap, because I wasn't getting any sleep. And there's those system-induced pressures that we talk about. Generally, you don't really get time to think, because you're just being pulled out of interrogation to another interrogation, to the prosecutor, to the whoever really wants to talk to you. But yeah, I mean, RT are the heads and the pin, the tip of the spear when it comes to using you as a propaganda tool. And those Western accented journalists that we'll come on to a bit later on are really, really there to project that narrative. So again, you're trying not to get angry or show too much emotion. Just be as bland and as boring as possible.
During that course of that time, we lost contact with the main platoon that we were with. To cut a long story short, we found lots of more casualties in buildings and houses, and they were coming out of trees, and who couldn't keep up with the pace of what was happening.
So being intentional with your body language, this is quite an easy one for me, actually. You don't want any of the body language to be misinterpreted. You don't want any sudden moves that could be anticipated as aggressive. So this one was quite easy in a way. My sole aim really was to show my condition I was in. If you saw my wrists on the interview, I had a bandage. I wanted to show really the conditions I was in, how I limped out of the interview, because obviously I'd been stabbed in the leg. Those are really important. People need to really look at the situation, the condition, and the treatment you're receiving. I mean, Aidan Aslin did a great sort of video just before he was captured, proof of life video showing the condition he was in before they captured him, and then 2 days later he had whelps, bruises, and cuts all over his face where he was beaten. He was also stabbed in the shoulder, and so you can see those are really good tips that really you can see what your captors have done to you. So it's really important that you show those, but sort of hide the fact that you're showing it. They were trying to cover my bandages. They didn't want anybody seeing my injuries. And like I said, after a couple of interviews, they started to clean me up, which I didn't want to do, to be fair. But you've got to have faith that people at home are working to get you back, and you've got to keep your hope. And again, it's all about body language. You know, if you watch the video, minimal use of the arms. I'm almost sitting on my hands, so I don't do anything like that. I'm being boring, monotonous. So you know, it comes with a bit of age, a bit of as well. I think you're different if you're younger and you're put in the same situation as someone who's sort of seen a bit of time. People, for me, generally people have different faces, but sometimes they're the same characters. So you can assess people that are doing the interviews. But generally, those tricks will keep you alive. You've got to be boring. You've got to be bland. And like if you see the banners on the bottom of when they're interviewing me, you can see the lines they're taking. And then we're going to play some more of the questions they were asking me, so you can hear the questions later on.
I stayed with another medic and another medic sort of helper to look after the casualties. We put them in one, the sergeant medic put them in one building. We had no food, no water, no idea where we were. Communications obviously down. So I then decided to try and look around for Ukrainian troops around that area.
Control your speech is quite essential. You don't want to appear alarmed. Again, you want to play the grey man. You don't want to appear distressed unless they tell you, which is quite often they tell you. When I did a excuse me, a Boris Johnson interview, we had to do 2 or 3 retakes because they didn't feel I was selling my urgency to get home, was how it was put to me. So if I didn't want my fingers cut off, maybe I should think about having a bit of panic in my voice. It goes to show that, you know, they're manipulating you in every possible way. I mean, they're using every trick in the book. Generally, there were some interrogators that were pretty bad. Most of them were pretty bad. They looked like they'd been drafted in at the last minute, didn't really have much training. And you can work them as much as they work you. However, there were 2 or 3 guys that were leading these interrogations who were clearly FSB, who clearly had some training, clearly controlling the situation. So, and I refer to one in my book as Mr. Balaclava, but he spoke with a very good English accent, but with not really a Russian twang. It was more of a Middle Eastern twang. So you constantly listen to these people and assessing each situation. When you're first captured, you're assessing those situations every 5 minutes, then 15 minutes, then every half hour, every new position you're being taken to or room you're being taken to, then you're meeting another guy, then you're assessing him. It's very busy at those first stages of initial capture. However, I'd say most of the interrogators couldn't speak much English. So it's really important that when you're getting a message out that you have to be really clear. It's difficult when you're from London like me and got a London accent. You've got a Cockney twang. One of the things that I knew I wasn't going to get through when I was captured was the filtration process. So one of the things I had was a plan and tell them I was English, because I do speak a bit of Russian, but it's still with a Cockney accent. It still doesn't really, it's not going to get me through, and I can pretend I'm a Ukrainian. So really, you've got to be clear in speech. Also, you don't want anything you say to be taken out of context and then get interrogated on that further. So you're constantly thinking ahead of what the next question they're asked while listening to the question they're asked and trying to slow everything down so you can come up with a formulated response. And I'll give you an example. So you can't refer to, the DPR as separatists or terrorists. You're constantly doing that when you're on the safe side, but when you're in captivity, you have to readjust those questions, and start changing the way you formulate your answers. Because if you say the wrong thing or you say a Ukrainian word, that's enough to get you beaten. And if you get beaten, there's no medical facility. You can't really just go out of a prison cell and see a doctor. You've really got to mitigate those injuries. So you've got to be conscious. You've got to think about what you're saying and be clear and concise in it.
Azov Battalion, they've been accused by the United Nations of committing war crimes and atrocities. I've seen time and again myself, people who were detained from Azov Battalion, they have swastikas, painted all over their body, and they've been accused of Nazi affiliations by BBC, by Vice News, by, what have you, by many different news media around the world. Obviously, you know more about them since, you've been in closer contact, if you will. I'm not saying in direct, but still, what can you tell us about that, about their Nazi affiliations and about their atrocities against peaceful civilians?
There are some other points, but I'm going to skip those so I don't bore you to death with all the points individually. But one of the key things is remember your training. There's a lot of other things that come into play while you're being pulled out for propaganda. One, you can manipulate the situation to probably get some morale building cigarettes or clean drinking water. Clean drinking water was a real problem at the time because we were drinking from these 25 blue gallon drums that were filled up in a well somewhere that sometimes just stunk of diesel or chlorine with little wiggly things in them, rust particles. I mean, we was drinking technical water for several months. So it wasn't water that we would drink at home. So to get some spring water or a bottle of water was great. And a cigarette was quite, something at the time because we didn't have any luxuries at all, not even a toothbrush or toothpaste, which people don't even seem to really think about when you come out of captivity. So, 3 months of not brushing your teeth, getting a toothbrush or some toothpaste is quite a luxury and a godsend. You're scraping off the plaque, you've lost your taste buds because all you're eating is bread. So you gradually over 4 or 5 weeks, you start to lose taste of everything other than bread and yeast and bad smell and halitosis and stuff like that. So you're not really looking after yourself, and there's nothing you can do about it. You can see the state of the trial, the condition I was in, because we were literally moved about 2 or 3 days before the trial. So, when you're not eating as well, that's playing up on your emotions. You've got to keep check of those. There's a lot of things that you need to remember from your training, which, it's a very long course. If I went into this, it'll be like 9 episodes. So you have to remember your training. Part of it, one of the big things was for me was the production of gathering intelligence. Obviously, you can't see anything in a cell, an isolation cell, so everything comes about hearing. You're trying to get a pattern of life. You're trying to understand what's around you. One of the things I do remember was a dodgy exhaust pipe on a car, which was the lady that brought round the bread every morning or the food for the soldiers. So, whenever that car turned up in the car park that parked above us, I knew she was turning up. I knew what time it was. It was about gathering information that could give you an idea of the time of day so you didn't feel so disorientated. They would play heavy metal on the loop, and then you work out how many songs before you get to the first one, and then you work out 3 or 4 minutes per song. Then you can get an idea of how long the loop is, and when you hear that song, you got an idea of the time. So you're using tricks to keep your brain active, keep yourself sane. You're trying to get information on notice boards, and if you're put a hood on and you hear a radio, you're getting times and dates off that. you know, you're pretty much trying to keep yourself busy with making a mental picture in your brain, and also recognizing the individuals. We were able to ping several of these individuals who held us in captivity once we got home, including the journalists. Obviously did some research, which is why I'm going to talk about this a bit later on, because people need to understand how RT fit into this, and they fit into the systemic, you know, torture and policy of Russia, and how they fit them into the grand scheme of things.
About these allegations of atrocities to civilians, because I can't really comment on that. I would if I knew, to be honest. Some of the guys I've met in Azov are generally guys that can't get work in their villages and go there because of the trademark or the stamp or whatever. I know there are sort of maybe minimum, you know, sympathise still the old cause of Nazis, but I don't really see much of it at all. It's not like people walk around preaching it or doing anything in Mariupol or shouting it from the rooftops. Don't really see it at all. I've lived in Ukraine for 4 years. If it's about denazifying Ukraine, I have never seen a Nazi flag, never witnessed any Nazi behaviour, no street parades, no. I've been in Kiev, I've been Bakhmut, I've been to Kramatorsk, I've been to all around Ukraine, and I've never seen this. Granted, actually, most of my time is spent actually on the east side, because my wife and I live in Mariupol. So this is why I made the effort to learn Russian, because I could hear it every day, and it's easy for me.
Are you being treated as a prisoner of war, or are you being treated as a criminal here? Because you're not a Ukrainian citizen, and are you a hired gun, or are you a Ukrainian POW? What are you at the moment? Did they tell you?
Remember, this is a country that's invaded its neighbour, Ukraine, with Nazi paramilitaries like Russia's group and Nazi PMCs like Wagner, named after Hitler's favourite composer. Remember what I said about not losing your temper and meeting aggression with aggression? I've just watched Russia slaughter over 25,000 civilians, including hitting maternity hospitals, theatre, including women and children. This is the narrative they're pushing. How would you answer that? I mean, let's address some of those questions. So Azov, when I was in 2018, Azov only ever had 2,000 active servicemen and women. So in a country of 40 million people, and you're judging your opinion that the whole country is Nazi because of 2,000 people, it's probably less now since the war began. So it's very hard to keep your composure. Don't meet aggression with aggression. I mean, it's incredibly hard. You have to become overnight a politician, deflecting the answers to a point where you're not going to get yourself beaten up later on, projecting a bland, boring, I don't know mantra and conversation. I mean, it's incredibly obvious the picture they're trying to paint. The fact that 90% of the guys in Azov, 99% of the guys I would say in Azov are not Nazi. Yeah. Have I seen suspect tattoos? Yes. Did I see them in the British Army? Yes. Did I see the American Army? Certainly. Did I see people that had weird, extreme views? There's extremism in every walk of life. You know, there's extremism. So, you know, I don't abide by it myself. I'm not a Nazi, but now I'm being portrayed on Russia Today as a Nazi. I'm a Nazi. The first thing they brought up didn't mention the fact that they invaded Ukraine with Nazi paramilitaries or PMCs.
They've just told me. So in the last couple of days, in Ukraine we are legal. We have 3-year contracts. he put a bill out and changed the laws to allow foreigners to join the army, and we essentially fight under the colours of Ukraine, and we fight for Ukraine in that aspect. Here, I'm told that we are now considered to be illegal combatants, even though we have got ID, live here, married here, because we are not citizens of Ukraine. So from what I'm told is that we could go to trial. We're under investigation for the next 3 days. We could go to trial. And if it goes to trial, the worst case scenario is death penalty, which has just been told to me today. So you can understand why I'm a little confused at the moment, because Zelensky's put out, obviously, a call for foreigners to join the military. Obviously, I get one side of it here, so I don't know the full information on both sides. I get one side. So he's put a call out to the foreign military, foreigners to come join the military. Essentially, myself and Aidan Aslin are the first foreigners to join the military, and it looks like if we don't get swapped, we could actually end up, you know, in a worse situation, being neglected by the very country we fought and served and lived in and married to. So I hope that's not the case, but you know, it's war at the end of the day, and people want, you know, to exchange prisoners, and people want different things. So we're hoping that something can be arranged that can get us back to Ukraine, so I can see my wife again, you know, and make some decisions. I definitely need hospital and some treatment on some stuff and things like that. Otherwise, the worst case scenarios, we could just be, you know, get the death penalty here, which is no good for anybody.
That's a really good question. What am I? I mean, if you say I'm going to be, I've got no legal reputation. I'm not in an interview. This isn't a nicey. I'm in an interrogation with the FSB and the MGB in the room behind the camera. This guy's just painting a picture. What am I? Well, legally, I am entitled to the rights of a POW under the Geneva Conventions. However, that's not going to happen. I know that. Generally, their perception of me that I'm Nazi and a mercenary and a terrorist. So you know, they've been gunning through that through the whole interview. So we know what's going to be pumped out in the Russian media. He knows exactly that I'm not going to get any rights of a POW, even though I pay my tax in Ukraine. I never set foot outside the country I had legal status in. I keep reminding people that I didn't fight with the PMC, a private military contractor, and I wasn't with a paramilitary group. I was with the Marines, 1st Battalion from Mykolaiv. So they know that. However, their portrayal of me will be that I'm a Nazi mercenary and a terrorist. There is a degree of rapport building you have to do, which you're taught here to try and get things to keep you healthy and keep you to aid in your survival. So, you know, I do try to agree with some parts of what he says, only because I want cigarettes, water, spring water, anything chocolate to keep some calories in me, which at the time I wasn't getting any other than a few bits of bread. It soon quickly worked out that we could get some cigarettes, water, and things from the media if they wanted something. And then I was first to sort of say, can I have a cigarette, or can I have a glass of water, a bottle of water? You know, even one time they asked me if I'd eaten, and I said, I haven't eaten in 2 days. And quite quickly, the guards brought out a Don Mac burger for me, just so they could film me eating a burger on the camera. I mean, it's dehumanizing. It's the worst kind of humiliation, but you have to stay alive. The only thing you've got really now is hope, and if you lose hope, you lose everything.
Russia doesn't have the death penalty, and outside of Moscow, nowhere else on earth is this court acknowledged to have any legitimacy. But after a trial lasting a few days and their confessions to being mercenaries, Aidan Aslin and Shaun Pinner were convicted and sentenced to death for terrorism by the so-called Donetsk People's Republic. A Moroccan man, Sadoun Brahim, received the same sentence. The two Britons were members of the Ukrainian Marines. They were captured in the fight to defend Mariupol.
I was captured on April the 13th, and up until June the 9th, when I was put on trial, I was moved about 2 or 3 days before the trial to another prison, an open prison, not told I wasn't going to get the rights of a POW. And really, there's a well-documented picture at the trial of me and Aidan and Brahim trying to talk to our so-called lawyers about why we couldn't plead not guilty. It was just hard not to get angry. And I did lose my temper in the trial. The judge did scream and shout at me. And it's very difficult to not lose your temper when you're being told you can't do, you can't have the basic rights, human rights. We couldn't plead not guilty. We had no defense. We weren't allowed to build a case. We weren't allowed to use the contracts that we were told were sent to the Russian embassies. We weren't told, we were just Nazi mercenaries and terrorists. And that was what they were projecting to the Russian audience.
Вот что на это сможет ответить Британская империя?
Если ее подданных.
Вот если 2 ее подданных сейчас сдернут или расстреляют, вот что они будут делать?
Угрожать.
Не, угрожать может сколько угодно, но для Бориса Джонсона это такая большая проблема.
Никогда не расстреливали, их только вешали.
Мы же не имеем дела с пиратами. Слушай, это не средние века. Да не, у нас, слушай, мы не четвертуем. Причем здесь это? Зачем нам брать примеры неизвестно с кого? Какая нам разница, кто кого вешал?
Если можно было повесить, Саддама Хусейна, можно повесить и этих.
Зачем нам повторять это, если можно расстрелять?
Вешать.
Слушайте, что ж такое?
Расстреливают военных, а вешают преступников.
Ничего подобного. В Советском Союзе расстреливали не только военных. Высшая мера наказания приводилась вполне конкретно.
Но Эйхмана повесили.
Я извиняюсь.
Но не в Советском Союзе.
Но вешали с 43-го года, и Власова повесили.
А потом уже было как? Это прописанная процедура.
В Киеве в 45-м году.
Ну, слушай, сейчас 2000...
на площади повесили.
Но сейчас 2022 год. У ДНР и ЛНР есть свои законы. Вот они как решат...
расстрелять или повесить?
Так они как вот написано будет.
Написано расстрелять или повесить?
Вообще класс. Четвертовать. В 21 веке мы на полном серьезе обсуждаем, как в центре Европы надо казнить наемников. Дожили. И начинаем обсуждать.
Казнить
а может все-таки повесить или расстрелять? А лучше давайте четвертуем. Новый мир. Да? Хаос. В хаос движемся.
Вот вопрос, например, с теми же самыми наемниками, да? Расстрелять их или казнить как угодно мы всегда можем успеть. Да, но почему мы им еще не можем воспользоваться вот нынешней ситуацией, да? Предложить, например, Британии то же самое, обменять этих наемников на замороженные активы России. То есть мы знаем то, что их элита на это вряд ли пойдет, да? Они уже показали то, что не готовы идти ни на какие компромиссы. Но это вызовет, конечно, бурю в британском обществе, особенно со стороны родственников этих наемников, да? Потому что они будут там во всех таблоидах кричать о том, что ну вот какие-то там, даже это же не наличные средства, единицы, нолики.
By the time the trial came round, the popularity, I mean, it was like we were Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie walking down the red carpet. I mean, the amount of press, and it was all for press, all for the show. But there, on the flip side of it, what could you do to someone you've just given a death penalty to? So it changed ever such a lot after the trial to keep hope and battle with hope and keep positive, really, at a time where now it became about from system-induced pressures to self-induced pressures and holding that all together. And through July and August were some of the darkest months I can remember, thinking any day now I can be taken out and shot. And during that time, who pops up again? Roman Kazarev, who comes in and wants to do a 40-minute video of us before we're executed in some sort of Shaheed video, talking about our time in captivity. So, Roman Kazarev was someone who I'd never known prior to this. Aidan Aslin was going through his own dramas with Graham Phillips, the English pro-Russian supporter, who interrogated him in one of the most awkward and unwatchable interrogations that I've ever seen of someone who's in handcuffs, been brutally tortured and beaten. So we're both going through this same rigmarole, and Graham Phillips is doing exactly the same, but he's a Brit. He's a Brit who's doing that to Aidan Aslin. So it has been a test. I always look at things positively. I come out of things positively. I certainly learned about myself in captivity. I certainly knew what I was capable of doing in the worst extreme case that you could imagine. So when we did get exchanged, obviously, just to end on, we were able to track down a lot of these individuals who were part of our fake sham trial and our torture and propaganda, and we are looking to get some justice for people like Brahim, who's stuck in Morocco, who can't get out of Morocco, can't even get a passport as part of the deal we assume that has been struck to send him back to Morocco. So what we take as basic human rights, Russia has none of that in their judicial system, none of it whatsoever. So it is, I hope I've just informed you of how really RT are used in this propaganda. I'm one of many who have gone through this same process of interrogation by public opinion, and we're not given any choice in the matter. And that's really how they formulate their propaganda in stages: the initial capture, the torture, the brutal torture, then the trial by public opinion. So that's already formed by the time you go to trial. It then goes to trial, and then you already got an automatic death sentence or maximum, prison sentence. And those stages are systemic with Russia, and that's why I keep pursuing, even for Brahim, the justice that he quite rightly deserves to get after being treated that way. Who can't get that justice that we're now working towards. We've been successful in taking Russia to court and winning, and now we're looking to enforce that verdict through the English courts, which the Russians use, ironically. So if we're successful there, I'll be the first person to really take a state to court, and we will look to enforce that verdict. And we're sitting on 300 billion of Russian assets and money. So if we do win, it will set precedents and open the door up for many, many people who have really suffered at the hands of Russian brutality, lost houses, lost people, family members. Money doesn't get those people back, but some people have lost everything. So if we can give, someone something for the atrocities that Russia have committed, then it'll be a worthwhile endeavor. And thanks for listening.